we care about these stories being told, right? I mean, we have a whole podcast devoted to, fangirling over all of these stories. It would be such a shame and such a disservice to not support the people who are creating the things that we love. Hello, and welcome back to the Fangirl Feels podcast. My name's Olivia.
My name's Tanya.
And we're the podcast where we have an emotional analysis on all the books, movies, shows, all the things that we're consuming that you probably consume too, and that we get to talk about from, our emotional perspective because we're fangirls. So yeah, welcome back. Today, what are we doing today, Tanya?
If you've been watching the news, listening to the news, you've probably seen that 2 unions have gone on strike, WGA and SAG-AFTRA. If you've been paying attention to the news and history, you might have predicted that this would be happening, and I foresee more unions going on strike in subsequent years.
As they should. Also, just based off, I know we're going to deep dive into it, but just what I'm seeing on the internet around the asks, it's kind of insane to not go on strike. It's insane. This is insanity.
You mean like the members
asks,
of the union, their asks?
Yeah, what they're asking for, and then like what the studios are like coming back with or refuse to accommodate. Like the AI thing where they would be like, I'm going to use your face, and pay for a day's wages and use it in perpetuity. Excuse me.
Just all saw a Black Mirror episode about this. So Black Mirror again is a history documentary because it's just foretelling the future.
Yeah. And it's sad because we've talked about on this podcast, we're not necessarily opposed to AI in terms of helping our work, but why are we using AI to come after people's likeness and livelihoods? This is not what it's intended for. Why are we doing this? Everyone back up.
It brings up conversations of ethics. It's not ethical. Where are people going to draw the line with AI and other things we'll talk about today in terms of labor?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm excited to talk about it and learn because this is relevant to us too. We have no connection to these studios necessarily, but I mean, we are tangential to some extent as we discuss some of this stuff. So it is relevant. It's relevant to all of us.
Yeah. We'll dive into that because we're technically considered influencers. I know we don't have a lot of followers. We're still covering it and we're still influencing people. People are still listening. So we do have a moral, ethical objective to support these laborers if you can, and you should. The risk is that you might be blackballed from those unions in the future and from that work. So it's important to support other laborers who are striking for basic human rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it'll affect us in the future or not. It's just they deserve to be paid for their work.
And you should support that.
And we should support that. So yeah, excited to dive in. This will be interesting.
Learn. So like I mentioned, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Again, because we're content creators, we talk about movies, TV shows, books. We want to support these laborers, and we would hope that they would support us too. We're all stronger together if laborers fight and unite together and stand in solidarity. So we think it's important to talk about the people behind the works that we talk about and we consume on a daily basis. Because at the end of the day, a majority of these workers on these production studios are most affected by the income inequality. And the actors you see that are making the big bucks, those are only 2% of all actors. There's so many people behind all these productions that are being affected by this as well.
87% of SAG-AFTRA members make less than $26,000 a year. So, to your point, we think of actors and we think of the Brad Pitts. Hey, that's not majority. These are people who are making below minimum wage, right? They do not make a livable wage on this work. And they deserve to, and they should.
And that number you brought up, that income, is like the minimum someone needs to make in order to get healthcare. So if you make below that, which is a large percentage of people, you said like 87%, they're not getting healthcare. So again, basic human right. They should have healthcare. So
yeah, agreed. Wow, so sad. So that's to your point. It's important to know because these are not just millionaires asking to make more millions. Those are the 1%, if even that much. It's just people who are trying to make a living doing what they love.
People have probably seen and heard of late night shows going dark or playing reruns. You've probably heard about Cillian Murphy recently and Emily Blunt leaving the Oppenheimer press tour once the SAG-AFTRA strike was called just this week. Well, when this airs, when we drop this, it'll be last week. We wanted to do a deep dive so that people like us who aren't necessarily in Hollywood, or other people that watch a lot of content, or influencers who we would fall into the category of, can understand what's happening and support.
And it's good to, I'm glad that you did this research, because I know I'm guilty of just using TikTok as my source of truth, which is not great. Even as I'm, saying TikToks to you as, oh, I read that. Like, we shouldn't do that. It's not the greatest thing. So it's good that you actually did the research to understand this rather than just going off what people say. Always do your own work. It's always good.
Yeah. Do your own research, look up the facts yourself. Obviously, yeah, I watch the TikToks too, and sometimes I'm like, I'm not going to double check that. Let's move on. But yeah, it's
I believe
smart
everything you said.
The internet doesn't lie.
No, this has to be true. No issues. It's hard.
Yeah. It is hard. Misinformation is obviously like a huge issue.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about first what's happening. So both WGA and SAG are now stalled in their negotiations with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, AMPTP. Lots of acronyms. We'll go over them in the description of this video. AMPTP represents the studios and the streamers that produce a vast majority of filmed content. And this move of both of those unions going on strike together marks the first time in 63 years that Hollywood's writers and actors have joined in a strike together, which happened in 1960. And it's important, that's critical, because right now we're in a place where there's new technology. Again, there's influencers, there's new factors going in to these negotiations and discussions, for example, AI, that weren't present before in 1960.
That makes sense. And the streamers, I mean, no one consumes traditional content like cable TV anymore, right? No one even owns cable TV anymore. Or maybe they do. I apologize if you do. Don't mean to erase your existence, but
cable TV erasure.
Cable TV erasure. But yeah, most people are Netflix, all the different subscription services. Like, they haven't done any negotiations since 1960?
No, they have. So what happens is that every year, or I forget, there's like a set time frame when the contracts go up into renegotiation. And so it's come to a point ahead where both sides don't agree on the negotiations. I want to say it's like every 3 years. I'll have to fact check this afterwards. But, they come up for renegotiation. Typically, both parties will come to an agreement. But we're reaching a point where there's just such a big disparity in wealth, and, the issues are too large that they aren't coming to an agreement, and they're still striking. And we'll dive into like the specifics in a bit.
That makes sense. Crazy.
Insane. So while the specific demands of both of the unions differ, they both are in pursuit of similar things: broader protections for their members over contract minimums, and the restriction of generative AI used for content creation. Again, AI is going to be a big theme, I think, throughout our podcast.
Yeah. As we work in tech-related jobs along with this and AI. And AI is just coming for everyone. It's in everything almost these days. As an artist, too, as an illustrator, I see it come up in our conversations around people being able to upload my art into a generator to then create art that looks like mine. Yeah, what you were saying, the ethical implications of all of this, where you're taking people's labor or rights and creating content, is we need to regulate it.
Yes.
Hold your horses, people.
Yeah, I think so. I have a hypothesis that, and I haven't read this anywhere, but it's just my hypothesis that so labor involvement current day has decreased over time since the 1800s when they came about. And, union membership. So union membership has declined since unionizing came about in the 1800s. And I believe that's because with every new generations of workers, they are less knowledgeable about unions. There isn't a tech union where we live that I know of. I don't think there is. I would have joined one for sure a couple years ago. I think that employers don't have any benefits to telling you about unions or that you can do that. So you are kind of left unaware. And if you aren't being educated about that in school, your job's not going to tell you. I think that decreases union membership or even union knowledge and how that can benefit you.
Yeah, I don't think I realized unions could exist in other fields outside of, traditional blue collar jobs, as we would describe it, you know, like factories, miners, those types of things. I always thought that that's where unions existed growing up. I never thought, and obviously I just never considered any of those fields of work. So I just thought unions don't apply to me, but that's not necessarily true.
I thought the same thing. And then I was like, wait a second, we can have a tech union for sure. And then
Yeah.
we saw throughout from 2020 to now, there have been like several tech employees unionizing.
I mean, even my brother-in-law, for example, is a doctor, and there's, you know, like medical student or like residency unions and fellowship unions, you know, to protect those workers, because residents get really overworked and mistreated in their time in residency and fellowship. I don't know about fellowship, but I know in residency. So I only learned about that through him. It's like, oh wow, I didn't realize you're in a union for being a doctor. That's cool. Didn't know that.
So needed. Yeah, and fellowship too. So Olivia and I
Do
both
they?
have
Okay.
like medical family members. It depends on your specialization, but like
Yeah.
we have heard of it. It's insane the amount of hours these people have to stay up and who are working on your body. Like,
Yes.
okay, they all need to be in a union now, immediately.
Yeah,
Because it's
yeah.
not ethical by any
No.
means.
It's not. It's so scary. So yeah, learning that just so they can get basic pay and go to sleep.
Go to sleep.
Go to sleep so they can sleep. I'm for it. I'm pro sleeping.
Yes.
Please let that be known, everyone. I am pro sleep.
You heard it first. That's our podcast stance. Pro sleeping.
Pro sleeping. We'll buy a shirt that says that.
So we did want to talk about the history of unionizing and striking in America, as well as Hollywood. For anyone that doesn't know, there's a lot here that I hadn't heard of previous to looking it up. So specifically in US history, the labor movement has been a bloody and violent history. It's nuanced and layered and includes issues such as politics and race and so much more. And essentially unions started because employers had too much power and often tried to pit laborers against each other. So labor unions unionizing together began during the Industrial Revolution during the 1800s. Essentially, if you have learned about history, the Industrial Revolution just essentially moved humanity down a path of technology that previously hadn't been there. And with that came factories, new ways of work, and ways that employers can make money. And that being said, since it was all new, there were no rules or regulations. It had to be built up since then.
Interesting. That Industrial Revolution, man, changed everything.
Yes.
It's nuts.
If you see like timelines of human history, you see like things have been pretty like stagnant in terms of like progress we make with like tech and like civilization until we get to the Industrial Revolution. Then it goes up, and then when you got to the tech industry, it's just like what is it, like every 3 years things like improve by like some sort of degree. It's insane. It's Moore's law. Anyways, back to the history lesson. In the 1800s, when the labor movement began, factory owners held almost all of the power. There were a few laws in place to protect workers, and consequently abuses were common. So the laws in place that we have now started because there were no laws in place. So things like factories being too dark and being dangerous, many laborers working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And lastly, children being employed in coal mines and factories.
What could possibly go wrong there? You know, what's the issue, guys? Why did they think that was a good idea?
I don't know. So the very first union in the US was the American Federation of Labor, AFL, and it was one of the first largest organizations of skilled workers. And as I mentioned, with the labor movement being a bloody history, oftentimes if you Google, there have been several bloody strikes in the past where strike breakers would be brought in by the company to break up the strikes, and that led to violence. So that's the history of striking and unionizing in America. Now I'm going to talk specifically about the history of WGA and SAG-AFTRA's history. WGA stands for Writers Guild of America, and they began in 1921. And essentially, it started when 10 angry writers formed the Screenwriters Guild when a major film studio announced wage deductions for those writers. So just 10 angry people. Listen, people, it just starts with 10 people to make change.
Good for them. I mean, I would also be upset. Wage deductions, like, excuse me? Make it make sense.
Yeah. They soon affiliated with other unions, so like the Authors Guild in 1933, and then later on they combined the Writers Guild of America East and the Writers Guild of America West to form one large organization. And the importance of joining a union like this would be a minimum salary, so WGA minimums, credit protection, residuals, healthcare for employment, and pension for employment as well.
It gives you just some sense of job security, even when you're in a very tumultuous, I'm going to use that word, tumultuous job, volatile job.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes. And we'll talk about this soon too, but like oftentimes these folks, because they're working on shows, they're only working for like a couple months out of the year. We don't, the way that if you're employed by employee in other fields, you may be employed for years at a time with no break, versus they're kind of like by contract. Say like they're filming a Marvel movie, they're only going to be shooting for like maybe 6 months out of the year, and it keeps getting shorter with streaming shows. Those productions have shortened the time frame that people would be employed from like 9 months to like 4 to 6 months. So that is pay for people that's being taken away from them because of these streamers.
Yeah. And I saw some, again, a TikTok, which, correct me if I'm wrong when I say this, where I know with actors and probably with writers too, if the shows are shorter these days and if they don't know if they're getting picked back up, for years later, what you were saying, but then also like sometimes they're under contract where they can't work on other things like during times. I know like actors, that's the case. I don't know 100% about writers. So again, take all of this with I think it's true overall. I don't know the exact details, but yeah, where then they can't make work, they can't take on other work, and then they're not getting paid. It's just all messed up. Like, how are they supposed to survive?
Make it make sense.
Yeah, make it make
it make sense. It's because the
Mm-hmm.
executives aren't thinking that far. They're like, oh, I'm getting paid, so yeah.
Yeah, it's nonsense. It's like, where's the logic here?
Mm-mm. So for SAG stands for Screen Actors Guild and American Federation of Television and Radio Arts, SAG-AFTRA. Both SAG and AFTRA were two separate unions that have existed since the 1930s, but in 2012, that's pretty recent, that's when the two unions joined together.
Yeah, I always wondered what AFTRA sounded like. Again, the way this is being presented on TikTok, it sounds like, again, I'm not an actor, so I don't know anything about this. So when people are throwing this around like SAG-AFTRA, I'm like, am I supposed to know what this is? I don't know what this is. Like
for a lot of people, like this industry is pretty, like it's a small industry compared to like other industries. Like I feel like a lot of us can't relate, which is why we're doing this. Like we wanted to know, and then we also want other people to know as well, so that you can support them, and then also potentially fight collectively with your other laborers to improve your working conditions. That's the point of this altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. And we care about these stories being told, right? I mean, we have a whole podcast devoted to, fangirling over all of these stories. It would be such a shame and such a disservice to not support the people who are creating the things that we love, right? I mean, it's what they deserve. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be as obsessed with the things as I am if it weren't for them,
I would not exist.
I would not exist.
If Pedro Pascal didn't exist, okay?
If Pedro Pascal was not here. It's true. I mean, like, I love to fangirl over that man. And if I didn't get to see him in The Last of Us this year, it would have been such a shame. It's just, we owe it to them for giving us such joy,
Truly, hours of joy.
Yeah, it's great.
Spending more time with these works than my family.
Like we've said, you do consume so much content. No shame. No shame.
No. I bet people can relate.
But I mean, everyone does, though. I mean, I say this, I consume a lot of content, and I've talked about my mom before, I think, where she's watching a movie every single night. Every single night she's watching a new movie. I'm not that person, but still, I mean, sometimes I think we belittle how important, we belittle the arts in general, right? Like as a society, we don't value it as much. But then you see that where it's like, it's the will to live. These stories provide us the will to live.
It's true.
Yeah. They make life interesting. They're so important. So all that to say, yeah, we have to support them. We have to support the people that make it all possible,
Yeah.
We love them.
So as we mentioned, SAG was founded in 1933, which was considered the golden age of Hollywood, otherwise known as the studio system. But However, it didn't favor actors and their rights. Actors were subjected to predatory contracts with studios that had little respect for them or their well-being. And so SAG came about for similar reasons to most unions coming about. Laborers wanted a fair share of the pie that they helped bake. With the power of collective bargaining, SAG was able to advocate for actors' rights on and off the screen. There's benefits to joining SAG if you are an actor, you're in this field, health and pension retirement benefits, an app to track your residuals, and certain tools and privileges, and more. You can go to their websites to see so much more information. There's so much we could be covering, but we're trying to keep this short. We're just going over the high level information. So let's bring it to today. So we went from the history of unionizing and striking, and now we're going to talk about specifically what's going on today with WGA and SAG during their strikes. So we'll talk about WGA first because they went on strike first. On Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023, 11,000 members of WGA demanded fair pay and went on strike.
Is the entire union, did we say how big it is? Is it 11,000 people?
Yeah, so when
Okay.
when I mention those numbers, it's like who's a member. The last time that WGA went on strike was in 2007. A lot of us remember it. If we're around our age, we're in our 30s now, me and Olivia. They went on strike for 100 days. A lot of TV shows were affected by this. Most notably to me in my TV viewing history was Heroes. Heroes was a great show that had a lot of great writers and acting. And then after the strike happened, obviously the writers went on strike and the show completely went off rails. And also to mention, during this time period, in lieu of paying writers properly, there was a big pivot to switch to reality programming. And if you listen to our Love is Blind episode, we did kind of history of the creator of Love is Blind. And if you look at his IMDb, he created so many reality TV shows around this time. And I assume he benefited from the writers going on strike during that time.
It was his time to shine. Maybe not for the best, but it was his time to shine. I do remember this strike. I don't remember what shows of mine got affected, but I definitely remember it.
Yeah, if anything, like I'm pretty sure Avatar: The Last Airbender, the shitty version, came out in like 2008 or around that time, and I wonder if it was affected by the writer's strike.
Oh, do you think? Ooh, drama.
I'm just saying that I didn't look that up. I'm just wondering, but yeah, I wonder.
There's a part of me that hopes that's true because of how bad it is.
Yeah.
Right? That like I cannot believe that real people chose to make those decisions.
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope for their benefit. We'll see.
I agree.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the cost of these two current strikes. But when the 2007 Hollywood strike occurred, Hollywood lost over $2 billion over the course of the 3 months that strike occurred.
And I'd like to know what they were asking for. It's like, did they lose more money in that strike than if they had just satisfied their asks? You know, probably. I have no doubt that they did.
I think so. I didn't look that up specifically, but based off probably TikTok I saw, I think so. That like it would have just saved the money to just pay people instead of losing $2 billion.
Yeah, in 2 months or 3 months. I mean, not even just from my experience in corporate America and corporations, yeah, they absolutely probably just lost more money doing that.
1,000%.
Because they're not smart.
Just pay people. What are you doing?
really not that difficult.
Take like a couple million out of your $200+ million that you get every day, probably every day, every year, and then just give some to other people. That's it.
To people that are actually doing the work. It's
Yeah.
not just like you're not just giving it away, you're giving it to the people who do the work.
Who are leading to you making that money. So
wow, amazing concept.
Wow.
Pay people for their work. Amazing.
I
Wild.
came up with
that on the spot.
We solved it. You heard it here.
We fixed it.
It's us. So fast forward to today. On Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023, 11,000 members of WGA demanded fair pay. And so I didn't know this, but because I'm not a part of a union, but apparently before you go on strike, your union communicates with you and asks for a vote to see if you would be okay with the union going on strike, which comes with a number of ways that you are obligated to follow and support the strike. Otherwise, you'll probably lose your membership. So they had sent out a vote earlier this year, and 98% of members approved of it back in early March. And then starting around May 1st, that's when they decided to go on strike. So they had time to prepare. And so that's good. So like I had questions about like, oh, we're just going to go on strike next week. I don't have pay. I don't have any way to think of ways to make money. It's no, they give you time to figure that out.
That makes sense. Yeah. Get your ducks in a row or figure out an alternative during that time. Yeah. And 98%. Who are those 2%? No shame,
Right.
but curious.
Very curious their reasoning. Yeah. Or were they weren't paying attention. They're like, oh.
Yeah, maybe it's just like they didn't get everyone to respond. But regardless, 98% is pretty high. Yes. I mean, that is a majority if I know math.
Yeah. So here are a list of their demands and their reasoning for going on strike. So big reason specifically for WGA is compensation for screenwriters that have been adversely affected by the rise of streaming services. While executives and production studios have been making millions and billions, the writers have been adversely affected and making a lot less in comparison.
Makes sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but makes sense why they'd be upset.
Yeah. We would be upset too.
Yeah. They're the ones doing the work, like I said.
So a quote from an article I read from someone who's a union member: on TV staffs, more writers are working at minimum, regardless of experience, often for fewer weeks or in mini rooms, while showrunners are left without a writing staff to complete the season, the report read. And while series budgets have soared over the past decade, median writer-producer pay has fallen.
Oh, wow. That's wild. Because I the new Lord of the Rings show came out last year, and what's it called? The Game of Thrones show.
House of the Dragon.
House of the Dragon.
Yeah. Rings of Power.
Rings of Power. I mean, Rings of Power was the first billion-dollar show ever, right? And doesn't it cost? I know not just the one season. I think across the 5 that they're making. But you're telling me that then they didn't increase the pay of writers with that cost? Is this thing on?
Are you listening?
Well,
we brought this up before in one of our episodes, but Bezos is notably anti-union. So I wonder if that affected the culture. So.
Interesting. I wonder why.
I'll send you a podcast. It's nuts.
Very good.
It'll make you mad.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I'm already angry thinking about it.
I'm already riled up. Let's go. Play it right now. Play it
right now. We're just going to play it right here. Play it right now.
So now let's talk about SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild and American Federation of Television and Radio Arts. On Thursday, July 13th, 2023, 160,000 members of SAG-AFTRA decided to go on strike. So again, that's the number of members within that union. And that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people. More actors than I realized. Again, it goes to show most actors are not the like Brad Pitts or the Tom Cruises, you know?
Certainly not. There's a lot more actors that you see when you're watching your shows and your movies. So like WGA, SAG's contracts were up for negotiation this year, and ahead of their AMPTP negotiations, the union approved a potential strike with a vote of 97.9% on June 5th. So that's quite a lot of people. So for history again, SAG last struck against the studios for 3 months in 1980. Their most recent strike in 2000 was against commercial advertising interests. There is a history of striking in the past for these unions, but it's been a while since they have done so.
Yeah, for them, it seems like 1980. If the WGA was just 2007, for them being against the studios in 1980, that's a pretty long time. That's pretty serious.
Yeah. It seems like every 20 years, 1980, 2000, 2020s. Seems like maybe that's like how the tides turn in terms of like tech and stuff. You know what I mean? Like lots of like monumental changes in society.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting.
But the one in 2000 was against commercial advertising. It wasn't even against the studios, it sounds like. At least.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So their reasons and demands currently for their current strike. There's a number of reasons, and if you go onto SAG-AFTRA's website, you'll be able to read them all, but I'm going to go over the biggest reasons for why they're striking that you've probably heard of if you've been paying attention. So streaming revenue share. SAG-AFTRA wants 2% of the revenue that each show generates for a streaming platform to be paid to performers. $27.73 per hour. That's how much the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported as the average pay for California actors in 2022. However, However, to note also is that these actors aren't paid full time per year round due to the nature of their jobs.
Yeah, that's sad. $27 per hour not being paid year round. I mean, they're not making bank by any means.
No. That's why, like, there's always this cliche, like, if you're an actor, you're probably a waiter too, right? We've seen it in movies. If you watch La La Land, you'll get it too. But like, yeah, it finally is like clicking, like this is happening still today.
Yeah, until if they ever make that big break. I listened to that to bring back our husband, Pedro Pascal. You know, he's talked about this before, about how he did that for years, right? Until he made his break in his 30s or something like that. So sad.
Nuts. So other things, artificial intelligence, AI. They're not seeking to ban AI, but they want to make sure that any use of a performer's likeness to generate a new performance is done with compensation and consent. If anyone's been, again, I watched a TikTok about an actress who was working on a Marvel production and they called her to like, hey, go over there. And they like took like a screen, or sorry, like they captured her, like I
Like a
think
full
face
body
and her
scan.
body, yeah, her full body
Yeah.
scan, so that they could continuously use her likeness in future productions for $100. They just paid her $100, so that's so unethical.
Yeah, that feels dirty. That feels bad. And yeah, I like that it says explicitly not seeking to ban AI, because as previously stated, I think AI can have a place in helping us, you know, do our work more efficiently. I'm not opposed to it as a concept, but that's wrong. That's
Yeah.
wrong. Pay them to use that likeness.
Self-taped auditions. So SAG wants to limit the use of self-taped auditions, which in our world, what it equates to is when we go to interview at jobs and they asked us to do a project that's solving a real problem for them for free. It's essentially like a lot of hours for these actors to do these self-taped auditions that became more popular during 2020, but it's a lot of time for them to put together and also edit together. And previously, they would go in person, right? So a lot of that time isn't being utilized by them. They're going there themselves. So what they want to do is limit the auditions, these self-tape auditions, to no more than 5 pages of material. The AMPTP has offered an 8-page limit, so there's still negotiation about that. But I just thought that was interesting that we can in some way relate to this process.
I hate the like take home interview work. It's the worst. Anti that free design work or whatever it is it might be. None of that BS. No, thank you. So that, yeah, I approve of that. It makes sense. I mean, there's nothing here I haven't approved of that they're asking for. It's not like they're asking for a hot tub to be installed in everyone's houses. Like,
no.
They're asking for legitimate things. I don't understand.
So there's a lot more they're asking for. Again, you can go to their websites and see what they're demanding. So the total cost that will have on the industry and the economy, it's still to be determined, but there's some estimates being said. This is a quote from an article, which with each day that goes on for these strikes, the economic toll on Hollywood is beginning to prove concerning. So people who will be affected by this are the small business owners, are the people doing catering on the film sets, the florists, the prop people, the equipment rentals, the costumers. So many people are affected by this each day that it goes on. We do not blame the laborers. We do blame these studios and AMPTP for not coming to a negotiation quicker. And it's just sad, these are people's livelihoods. And per WGA, the strike could be costing the local economy $30 million a day.
A day?
A day.
Oh my God. That's wild.
Somebody from the Los Angeles Times said that LA could lose over $3 billion in total by the time writers return to work, whenever that happens.
Wow, is it worth it, guys? Like, is the studios, not the laborers, the studio, is this really worth it to like do this when you could just pay people better?
It seems like an easy fix.
It's
obviously really complicated, but like, come on.
It doesn't feel that they have the money. It's not like an issue of they don't have the money. That's what's stupid about it. You know, I would want to look at their finances and just,
Yeah. Like, let's see. And then we'll just go through it,
Yeah. Let me just look at your books. Let me get access to your QuickBooks. You think that's like what Disney uses? QuickBooks?
Probably. Yeah, probably. I think 1,000%. Bob Iger.
Yeah, he's just logging into like QuickBooks every day and it's just like looking at his profit.
His password's like Mickey123. Yeah. No.
Probably. Makes sense.
We'll do this for free. Call us Fangirl Feels Pod. Let us know.
We'll look at your finances for you. We're totally qualified to do that.
Yes, we are. We say multiple times, what is map?
Yeah, when I literally couldn't tell you what 97.91%, like I couldn't subtract that from 100.
Yes.
But I can look at your finances for you. It's fine.
It's fine.
No problem.
Speaking of, there were a lot of comments made by studio execs and people who are against the striking. Specifically mentioned Bob Iger, but there was someone told Deadline this quote, and so we're not sure who this person is, but they said, "I think we're in for a long strike, and they're going to let it bleed out." And then another studio executive said, "The end game is to allow things to drag on until union members start losing their apartments and losing their houses." What?
How does it feel to be a Disney villain, studio executive?
Right. That's their potential. They just finally reached their final form, is just Disney villain.
Truly, they just became the thing we've been writing about for centuries, I guess.
Yeah.
Who in their right mind would say that in complete seriousness? I'm just trying to understand. Like, how do you reach that brain space? How do you reach that brain space where I'm like, we're just gonna let them lose their houses, and then they'll come back to us?
No, come back. That's so many levels removed from humanity. Like, they are not relatable. They are the 1%. There's a reason that we say that, because they cannot relate to you or I. Like, as laborers, whether you stand on the left or right of the political aisle, we are united in that we cannot relate to these people.
Yeah, I don't even see this as like political, to be honest. Maybe people disagree with me. I just see this as basic human rights, which maybe that is political these days. Who knows? I mean, clearly it is somewhat.
Employers pit laborers against each other by making it political. So it is political in that sense, because they made it that way on purpose. So like when people talk about these issues, they call like unionizing a left issue, but it's not. This is a thing that will unite us. If you supported Bernie Sanders united people on the left and right for labor purposes, like the labor movement, because we can all relate.
Yeah. This is just about being treated well by your employer. That seems pretty non-political to me, but that makes sense that they would use it to pit people against each other.
And it's easy to do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
It is especially in this like political climate, very easy to do. I am just still trying to understand the mental brain space. What is the brain space that you get into where you can say, I hope these people lose their houses so they come back? There's a disconnect there for me. I don't even understand how you get there. How do you get there? That's so scary that humanity can turn into that,
Yeah. What happened to you to get to that place? Yeah. That's insane. To wish that upon anyone.
Yeah. Dude, you need help.
So, fuck that guy. All right.
No notes.
So we talked about the histories and the current strike, and we're going to talk about how you can support it. But we do want to at first talk about how to not be a scab and what a scab is. So again, this is a relatively new term for us. We learned it over the past year, the past couple years. I wasn't aware of it before then. So last week.
Literally for me, I never heard it before. I've heard that word more times than I've ever heard in my entire life, besides referring to a wound. Then I've heard this past week. I was like, why does everyone suddenly know what scab means? I've never heard this before. I thought this was one of those things of, being a child of an immigrant parent, where I was like, of course they wouldn't know what a scab is. But it's just funny to see that term thrown around so much now on the internet, like on TikTok, and everyone's, calling other people a scab. Like, why? How does everyone know this word? Where did this word come from?
Where did you find this?
Where did you find this? I clearly didn't know. Someone educate me. I need help.
Yeah.
Funny.
That's a theme with us as people. Just like Olivia and I grew up in immigrant parent households, and so they weren't saying American like colloquial terms. They weren't saying what are those called? Just like sayings. What are those called?
Like idioms and
idioms,
stuff like that.
Yeah. And
which
so
amazed
like
I even know that word. Idiom.
Yeah.
I didn't
so
know
we
that.
grew up like from work, like when we worked with other coworkers that grew up in America, like or had parents who grew up in America, they would say things and I'm like, what time are you from? Are you from the 1800s? Like, what are you saying? And I have to Google
Yeah. No, I don't blame you. Yeah. There's so many things like that where I've never heard this phrase before. And I think I know what you mean. But something's wrong here. I don't understand
Yeah.
what's going on.
There's
What
a
are you
break in
saying?
communication. Like, I suddenly
Yes.
don't speak English. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, suddenly English is my second language, even though I was born and raised here. But suddenly I don't understand.
The best.
It's fun.
But anyways, what does scabbing mean? So the word was coined during the early beginnings of the labor movement around the early 1800s when the Industrial Revolution started. Any worker who refused to join a union earned the label a scab. How the term exactly came to be, because it's kind of gross, like a scab, you know, but that's purposeful because it's unclear where the term came from. But in the 1700s, a scab was used to describe people of low moral character, which fits with how they were viewed by union members of all trades.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I kind of imagine it, you're like picking at a wound, right? Like that's what a scab is. A scab is like a peeled over wound. And if you're a scab, well, I don't know. But the way I'm like mentally thinking about it, it's like, oh, you are like opening the wound again, kind of picking at the scab. This is what my brain does. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I wonder if that's it. Yeah, what is it? The etymology, the like breakdown, the history of the word.
Yeah,
Probably it.
who knows? But yeah, interesting. Terrible word.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess it serves its purpose. Like, it does gross me out, and like, I don't want to be a scab. It's kind of gross, you know?
No, I would like not to be.
So essentially, I mean, scrabbing is essentially crossing the picket line. Don't do it. Before, it literally meant crossing the picket line. There'd be lines. Now that we're in a digital world, there's ways that you can cross the picket line, and it's smart to know how to not do so because you might unintentionally do so. So if you would like to learn more specifics on how to avoid being a scab, both of the unions we mentioned today have rules outlined on their sites for how to not do so. It's nuanced. You can ask them questions. If you're in these industries, I think it's smart to look them up because it'd be smart to look up which companies have been struck, just in case you've been working with a company that you're unclear if these unions are striking against. So now comes to how influencers can support the strikes as well as how to not be a scab. This is a popular discussion on TikTok. I'm sure we've seen lots of discussions about this on TikTok, Twitter, other social media, because again, there has not been strikes of this caliber before. There wasn't social media when these strikes were happening previously, and especially what we said 1960 was when SAG and WGA strike together. Social media wasn't even a factor. So there are things that you need to look up yourself to be smart and avoid being a scab.
Yeah, it's good to know. It is relevant to us to some extent. Yeah.
I think so. And we'll have to read these rules in in detail too. I just grabbed like things that might be relevant to us. I'll just read through them really quickly. Again, go to the website, but influencers should not accept any new work for the promotion of struck companies for their content. Influencers should refrain from posting on social media about any struck work, regardless of whether they are posting organically or in a paid capacity. So we did have questions about, we're doing this and we're not getting paid, but supporting that work and promoting it, it could still risk crossing the picket line. So we just have to be smart and make sure we're not doing that.
We just focus on books for a little bit, maybe, because books are not part of this. So
yeah, that's true.
The older stuff, like we've been talking about Twilight. That way.
Yeah, bring that up. Yeah. Other things that I thought was interesting too was like going to these press tours and in certain press events. So like, for example, going to participate in conventions such as Comic-Con on behalf of or to promote companies that these unions are striking against. This includes appearances, panels, fan meet and greets that involve struck work, and it is advised against. So you may participate in a convention in ways that are wholly independent of characters from struck work or sponsorship by struck companies. And again, I've only listed like a couple. There's a lot more rules that probably are more applicable to you. Just go check them out. But there are a variety of ways that you can show support and solidarity. They mentioned like even talking about this helps and posting the hashtag so people can see it and informing people. So that is our goal for this video is we want to help other people understand because we didn't before.
Yeah. And I think again, like for the first time, it does affect a lot of people. I think it affects people way more than we realize. Again, influencers are now part of this conversation. And I think anyone who has a public profile to some extent and seeks to do this kind of stuff, even in a fan capacity, it should influence you, probably does influence you. And yeah, this is the first time where we have access to this information. And I think people deserve to get paid for their good work. And I am a creative and I want to support other creatives in their endeavors to live off their work. So That's why this is important. Support living artists, support creatives. That's what they deserve.
Period. Thank you so much for listening to our episode about WGA and SAG's unions and strikes. We hope you learned. We love doing deep dives, historical deep dives. Olivia and I both love history. Hey,
history girlies for sure. Historical fiction, girly.
AP US history went up.
A push.
I
loved A push. Yeah, good times.
We hope that you follow us on Fangirl Feels Pod on TikTok, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Instagram. I think I covered everything.
And actually Google Podcasts. I just learned we're on Google Podcasts. I forgot about that. But we haven't mentioned it before. But yeah, we're on Google Podcasts.
The Googs.
The Googs.
Check it out.
We're on the Googles.
3, 2, 1. Bye. Bye.